Hey guys, I'm David Mitchell, founder and CEO of Tradeway. What if God himself gave you a blueprint for how to handle your money? Well, the Bible is a practical book. Let's dive in and see what it has to say about wealth, about risk, about leverage, and about investing, and uncover how trading in the stock market can be a powerful tool for moving towards your biggest goals. We're so happy you're here. This is The Word on Investing. Hey guys, glad to have you back with us on our podcast. We're going to have a great show today. I have a special guest with me today that I want you to meet. Her name is Diana Blood, and she's the compliance officer for Tradeway, and a lot more than that too. So we're going to just chat today, and I want you to get to know her a little bit, and I think you're going to learn some really neat things too if you are a potential trader out there, because we're going to talk about her background and how she came into being a trading and all that. And I think you're going to find it really, really interesting. So, Diana, how are you today?
I'm doing great, David. How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for being with us today. You drove all the way from Dallas out to the ranch to do this live with me. I really appreciate that. And here's kind of what I'm thinking I'd like to start out is, how did you first find Tradeway? What were you doing in your life at that point, and how did you find Tradeway?
Well, you might find this kind of interesting because this is one thing, although we've discussed many things, that we really haven't ever talked about. So I was the vice president of finance for the largest home improvement company in the state of Texas. A very successful company. I was very successful. My husband and I owned a home, 4 children, 2 in private school. I was also on the side running my own private business, doing loan closings for home improvement contractors all over the state. I had loan closers that worked for me. So I was entrepreneurial at the same time that I was working for someone else. Within all of that, though, there were some things that were going on in the world with the legislature trying to change lending laws and things like that. So I wasn't sure how much the entrepreneurial thing would go or how much longer it would go on. And as you know, running your own business, sometimes you have to incur debt and things of that nature. And we had 2 kids in private school, 1 in middle school, 1 in high school, private high school. So trying to work corporate USA, working 60 or 70 hours a week, and then running my business on the side, we made really good money, and we spent more than the good money than what we made. So basically, we were in our heads, or really over our heads, in debt. And I had kept this from Guy because he trusted me to make sure that all the finances in the house were running. And basically, hey, that's what I did for a living. I knew better, but it's just one of those things that no matter how much you know better, things are going well. So you're thinking, well, they're just going to keep going well. So I hadn't been sleeping very well, and I was thinking to myself, there has got to be a better way, a different way to do all of the things that we want to do in raising our children, keeping them in private school, giving them a college education without coming out with a bunch of student loan debt, and just giving them a good foundation to build on. So I hadn't slept very well the night before, and every morning I would get up, and I always had the radio going in the bathroom when I was putting on my makeup and things of that nature. And there was this guy that would come on the radio, and he would say, "Are you tired of the brake lights? Are you tired of letting somebody else fly your financial plane?" And I can't remember the exact commercial, but I'd heard that day after day after day. And I finally came to the realization that, you know what? What do I have to lose? Okay, it's $99. So, well, that's $99 I don't know that I really have. But hey, I got a credit card, so what's one more charge on the credit card? Just to go check this out and see how this is going to work. And I was afraid to tell Guy about it because I was like, I knew it would cause him to ask me a lot of questions like, well, why do you feel like we need to do that? And then there was going to have to be a confession happen where I was going to have to say, well, honey, we've got a problem and we're very near financial ruin in a lot of ways, or what could be considered financial ruin. Of course, there's always, a way out somewhere. And I said, I just keep hearing this guy over and over and over again. And I said, either he's going to be the answer or he's going to drive me crazy, one of the two. So I've decided that I'm going to go check it out and once and for all you just check it out. I mean, what do I have to lose for $99? And I said, don't worry about it. You don't need to go with me. I'll just check it out. And if it's anything, then you can come next time or whatever. Because I really, really feared having to make that confession to him that we were in dire straits financially, and I just was ashamed and I didn't want to do it. So he said, no, I'll come with you. And I was like, oh, Lord, now what do I do? He actually wants to go with me. I was like, okay, Lord, so that must be a sign. So we bought the ticket and off we went.
Wow. Okay. So I remember back in those days, by the way, that voice you kept hearing that was irritating was me on the radio ad. And I remember that ad. It's one of the favorite ones, I think. But the thing is, I did a lot of the step ones back in those days in the beginning classes. So I remember meeting you guys at a break more than once. You would come up at the breaks and we'd chat a little bit, even early on. I don't know if you did it the very first time you came, but I know early on we met. So how long was it before you decided to sort of jump in and buy what's sort of equivalent to what we now call the Trader Pro? Back then we called it a Top Gun. How long was it before you made that decision?
Well, I will have to say that we actually did it our very first meeting.
That doesn't surprise me. I figured that's what you were going to tell me, but I couldn't remember.
Well, what basically happened was what you always did each and every time was you opened with prayer, you opened with a sermon, and I am a very voracious note taker. I take notes on everything. I write everything down. And even to this day, I keep notes of a sermon because I find that in times of disquietness or whatever, I could go back and read my notes and read the biblical references, and that always helped me. So this was no different, and I was taking a bunch of notes because I knew I was going to have questions. And so I was listening to you preach because that was the very first part, and felt a very deep conviction that this was exactly where we were supposed to be at the time that we were supposed to be there. And so we went through the meeting, and it was just more and more confirmation over and over and over again. And of course, as the value builds, and coming from a sales background and a sales organization, I knew that the cliffhanger was going to be that price. And so when it came to that point, you would ask to fill out a questionnaire. Why are you here? What brought you here? Tell us a little bit about your story. And we had to turn them in before lunch. And then you guys reviewed them because you were very concerned about whether or not what you were doing was the right fit at the right time for all of the people that were in the room. And I'm sure there was a certain number that it was, and a certain number that it wasn't the right timing. So we filled it out, and you said when we filled it out and we turned it in, I want y'all to go to lunch, get a good lunch, pray about this, come back, and you're going to find out more about it, in the afternoon. So that's what we did. We prayed about it, and I had a little bit of confession time with Guy over lunch, and I said, man, I just think this is where we're supposed to be. And he said, I do too. And at that point, he was a Christian, but maybe more of a baby Christian. I came from kind of a charismatic background. He came from more of a conservative Methodist type background, maybe Methodist Lutheran background, maybe a little bit. And so where I was able to connect because of the background that I came from and a very deep biblical foundation, he didn't quite have that foundation. So we went to lunch, we prayed about it, we came back, we went through the afternoon. I was thinking, oh man, I was almost dreading, the end of the meeting. And then it was, you didn't even do anything then. You said, okay, now I want y'all to go home. I want you to sleep on it. I want you to pray about it. And I want you to come back the next day.
Okay, I don't want to interrupt you, but I want to stop right here and just give you my viewpoint, because you mentioned a sermon. And from my viewpoint, it wasn't a sermon. Like what I thought I was doing was showing out of the Bible business principles, because the Bible is the oldest book on the planet with business principles, economics, finance. It's full of them. And I would always I would show people, hey, the law of supply and demand is here in this scripture, and it blows people's minds, but it is there. Or the concept of risk-return trade-off, here it is in the Bible, and I would read that. But as you know, Diana, I will get on a rabbit trail and I may go off into some other things, and every once in a while the gospel comes out, right? So that to you, it looked like a sermon. That is so interesting to me. But that's awesome, because the Lord wanted it to be that for you. And I think most people call it rabbit trails nowadays. That's what they call them. But, I've had a lot of people tell me, David, I love the stock market stuff, but I come to hear the rabbit trails. But anyway, so that influenced you. But what was it about the actual information? Because I know the first morning is kind of building you up, making you think, well, maybe I could be an entrepreneur, which you didn't really need that because you already were one. But what was it about as the as the stock trading information started coming in with the first day that made you say, hey, this really could be for me, even though you're at a place where, if we're going to purchase a package, it's going to be on a credit card. What made you start thinking, yeah, I think I really do need to do this? Because a lot of people who are in that sort of financial situation where every month is kind of hand to mouth, and that's really most Americans, but a lot of them aren't thinking, well, how can I go out and invest more money in a situation like this, and why would that help me? So what is it about that meeting that made you start thinking? I know you mentioned the spiritual things. I know the Lord was moving in your heart. That's the most important. What about the information? Was there anything compelling that made you think, aha, that could really help our family?
I can tell you what it was. I know exactly what it was. When you started talking about the business principles in the Bible and the risk reward, that you have to risk something to reap the reward, and that's a biblical principle as well as a biblical business principle. Coming from the entrepreneurial background and everything that I knew about money and finance, I could tell everybody in the world exactly what and how to do with their money, but I didn't practice what I preached, if you will. So when you started talking about the parable of the talents, I started coming out from under the spirit of condemnation of the errors that I had made in my financial decisions, my own personal financial decisions, to the point that I understood that the parable of the talents and the risk reward return was not just about spiritual gifts. It's about the way that the Lord gifts us in different ways to do different things. And I was coming from an aspect of being totally and completely out of financial control and at a point of debt, that my debt threshold was larger than mine and my husband's annual income combined. And so when I started thinking about the fact that I was coming from an aspect of being not in control of something, and that the Lord had provided a way to gain control of it in a biblical way through biblical principles, it showed me a way to not feel condemned, but say, I'm in the right place at the right time because I'm getting ready to learn something that the Lord wants me to get control of. And He's going to show me how to do that. And He's going to help me get out from underneath this and be able to take my family to a different place.
Let me ask you this. You have a financial background. I mean, you had that, like you said, it's odd because you're sort of confessing today that you were in debt too much, but that was your business, and on that part of your brain, you knew all about it. You knew how to control it. You knew everything. You could even teach people that, but in your own personal life, there's always that temptation, well, we need one more thing, and we got a credit card, et cetera. So many of us, that happens. So here's my question. Your background in finance, had you ever seen anything other than just buy and hold? I mean, like in this meeting, I know that you saw the potential to have cash flow, like shorter term trades that give you the potential to have cash flow and week to week, even month to month income. Was that the first time you'd ever seen that? And what did that do for you?
Well, I have to say that it was very exciting because coming from being in an out of control situation and basically being shown how to regain control biblically and through a process that not only showed it, was teaching it, that it had the potential to do it. It's basically like handing someone directions in English that have been looking at directions in a different language and just couldn't understand it. And whenever anybody would talk about the stock market, I always thought, okay, so that means I have to have a broker. So I give somebody else my money and then they take care of it. And then they call me every once in a while and say, hey, good news, I just made you $50 or whatever it may be. This was a way for me to have control, to teach me how to do it myself. It gave me the ability, through learning a skill set, to determine my own potential. My potential was not being determined by anyone else but myself and the talents that I believe that I was learning that I already had, but didn't even know that I had, through learning biblical teaching about the parable of the talents. And then coming from an entrepreneurial background and financial background, learning how biblical that really was, but I just had never been taught it that way. I'd been in church almost my whole life and had never been taught it in such a manner that these are tools that the Lord provides for the little extra here and there, the little bit here and there, maybe to help someone else, the little here and there to put back for things that I never thought was possible. When you're coming from an area of debt that you literally don't see any way out, it's like somebody handing you a spotlight. Forget the flashlight. You've just been handed a spotlight and a way out. And
Wow.
That's what I saw when I was there.
I like right at the first of what you just said right there in that segment, this thing you said like it's a different language and you didn't know the language because the only language you were hearing is, and really it permeates the entire society. It comes from our grandparents, our parents. It comes from the educational system. Even if you go through the MBA program and get a master's degree in business, you are taught only the concept of long-term buy and hold investing. And they tell you, stay the course, give us your money, we'll invest it, and then when you're ready to die, we'll give it back and you can have a vacation and then you die. That's kind of the concept. And that's the language you knew. And you thought that was it. And what I think I hear you saying is you learned, the new language you learned is, yeah, that's what Wall Street wants you to think. And that's all they want you to know. And that you actually saw how you could gain the control and have the potential to create cash flow through shorter term trades. And you never saw that before. Now, here's I bet you heard me say this because I've said it almost since we started sharing this with people, is that most people don't realize investing does not create wealth. It's for people that are already wealthy, and it does not help you create wealth. Shorter term trading, cash flow trading, gives you the potential to create wealth. So all that the world wants you to know is investing. They want your little money you make from your job and you put it aside in your retirement fund. They want all that money because that little dab of money over millions of people adds up and they make billions of dollars in bonuses and all this from that money. And it make you maybe 8% a year in a good year. And that's what they give you out of it. And they're making triple digits. All right. So that's the game they play. That's the language you knew. And when you came, you learned a new language that doesn't have to be that way. You can do what they do with your money. When you send it, you give it to that little guy down the street who's your financial advisor. He sends it up to Wall Street and they trade with it while they tell you to buy and hold. And you learned you could do the trading. And you see that trading, I love the way you put it. It's a new language because it tells you, I now have the potential to create cash flow every week, sometimes in a matter of 2 or 3 days. And I never was given that information. And I'll be honest, I didn't learn that in the MBA program at Baylor. I learned it from my grandfather. And wealthy families know how to do this, but I don't know where it's taught. So we decided to start sharing it with brothers and sisters. And fortunately, you heard the silly little ad that said, who's making you stare at those taillights when you like to learn how to be your own boss, and you came. So this has been great because I'm getting your viewpoint about how to you it was a sermon. It was like God was speaking to you there at that stock market meeting. Secondly, you saw a new language on Wall Street that the world did not want you to know, and it gave you something to really think and pray about that first night. So now I'll pick it up on the next morning.
So the next morning we got up and you even said the evening before, you said, now I know there's some of you that are going to go home tonight and you're going to pray about this and you're not going to come back tomorrow. And that's okay because God knows the right timing. He knows the right people. And you had talked about predestination at some point during that day. And you said, God knows the people that are going to be here tomorrow, and he knows the ones that are not going to be. And I don't want anyone to leave here feeling bad if for any reason you don't come back the next day. So in the car ride home, we were kind of silent. We went home, we prayed about it. We came back the next day, and it just seemed like our spirits were just lifted, and we'd had an opportunity to talk about where we were. And I said, here's what I want you to do. Because my husband trusted me so fully with every penny that came into the household that I knew that if I said that I thought this was what we should do, then he would say, okay, then I think that's what we should do too. So what I asked him to do was I said, I'm going to ask the Lord to tell you if this is the right thing that we should do. Because I tend to be the more I don't want to say necessarily emotional, but I think that God created women a little bit more on an emotional plane. And this was one decision because it was so very important that I wanted him to make, because I knew that our whole financial future potentially depended on something, whether it was this or something else. And so I knew in my heart what it was, but I knew that I was not supposed to make the decision. I knew that that the Lord needed to tell him, and then he needed to tell me. And then I would know that that was my confirmation, not only from what I was learning and what the Holy Spirit was teaching me, but also that was my confirmation directly from the Lord through my husband that this is exactly what we should do.
Yeah, that's neat. Well, usually towards the end of that first day, I try to show you guys something that will make you lose a little sleep that night. Like I call it show the potential money, right? Show you a trade, a real trade that was done in the past and how it works, and kind of surprises you the return you can get on that, but compared to the small return you get when your financial advisor has your money for a whole year. Did you guys stay up and talk about that a little bit that night?
Well, I did, because coming from a financial background and the fact that finance in and of itself just fascinates me. It fascinates me how an inanimate object is the driver of nearly every facet of life. So I was fascinated by it, and I understood the mathematics of it, but there was still that part of me that said, oh, man, this just sounds too good to be true. And growing up the way that I did, I grew up on the farm. By a lot of standards, we were poor. My dad taught me the barter system. That's how he bartered. He bartered plowing a field for a half a side of beef to get us through the winter, and so on and so forth. So I kind of grew up in that. And I remember him saying, be very careful of anything that sounds too good to be true, because usually it's not true.
So what you were seeing is, before you went home the first night, you saw an example of a stock trade that lasted probably 2 weeks. You get in the stock, 2 weeks later you sell the stock, a 2-week play. Now this was an academic example of a play that had actually happened in the past, where it lasted about 2 weeks, maybe invested $6,000 in this play or something like that. And it ended up making triple-digit returns over a 2-week period. Now, if you annualize that, that can be quadruple digit annualized. And that's probably what you're thinking looked too good to be true. Is that part of it?
It is. But the other part of it was the mathematical part of it worked. So the entrepreneurial financial brain that I have said, well, yeah, it does work because the mathematics work. And because it was historical, it had already happened. It wasn't forecasted to happen because, in the financial world and in the business world, we talk about forecast and budgeting and profitability and all of those things. But with it being purely academic and the fact that it actually did happen, and it was based on the materials and the way that they're taught at Tradeway, it was very real to me. It resonated because it was true, because it was academic, because it was in the past, and because it was proven. It wasn't saying, okay, now if this does this, this, and this in the future, then X, Y, and Z happens. It actually said, here's the play, here's how it played out. This is exactly the way that we teach it, and this is what happened. So it's just kind of like historic truth. It happened historically. It's truth. It was the same way. And so that resonated with me because I could follow it.
Mm-hmm. And I think also because you could see, your mind could look ahead and see, I could do this. I mean, this is not rocket science, right? I mean, it's like it's a skill set, but I could do this. Even back then in those days, we had a good coaching program. So you probably saw you could take advantage of that. And you guys that are listening, let me just say this. Because of COVID, we already had everything in place. And I believe you mentioned the sovereignty of God a minute ago, Diana, but I strongly believe God's in control of everything. And he had our company, it's as if we were preparing for COVID before anyone knew about COVID, because we digitalized everything and had the ability to put everything online, including the very meeting you went to, but we had never done it before. And when COVID hit, we would have probably waited 3 more years or so before we started doing these live online meetings, and we had to just jump in and do it. And the very first one we did worked. Still today, 2-day event. So guys, you still have access to this. And I'm sure when COVID clears up, we'll have some more live meetings. I know we will, but we will always continue online too. So now if you go out to Tradeway.com, you can find a membership called Trader Pro. And it actually includes everything that you got access with the old Top Gun. It's interesting, Diana, because you've already told us you were in a place of debt, which means you didn't have a lot of cash. But back in those days, I mean, you bought the big package and you paid money up front for that thing. And what's so great, nowadays people can get involved with the Trader Pro membership, and that's a monthly fee, which we didn't have back then. So that is a great thing about this membership is it gives you so much benefit, so much educational benefit, and it's a monthly fee, and there's no risk because you can cancel it at any time. So you can go out to Tradeway.com and look up Trader Pro, and it's got a lot of these cool things that Diana got access to back in the day, such as the leveraging potential of options. You learn how to do options, which is kind of like being able to buy a $50 stock for $5 a share so you can get 10 times the shares. That's leverage, ladies and gentlemen. You learn these things through Trader Pro, which takes you all the way from your basic ground level foundation, knowing nothing about trading, all the way through to where you know how to do exotic options trades like spreads and iron butterflies, all these kinds of things like that. And you got all that information too. But now, ladies and gentlemen, you can get that Trader Pro for a small monthly fee. You can turn it off if it's not for you. It's really wonderful how this thing works. So the online, I mean, COVID was a blessing in a lot of ways, and everything is, because the Lord turns the things we think are bad into good for those that love him and who are called according to his purpose. We know that. So you learn things like something you may not have even thought about because of your buy and hold background is like you learn things where you have the potential to make money on the way down. That's called a put option. Trader Pro includes that. And also it includes a live trading hour every day, Monday through Thursday, where you actually get online and you have our professionals on there with you and a lot of other students, and you actually can do trades together. It's amazing. Now that you didn't get back in those days, but it's available now. So it's just really cool. And you still have the great coaching support we've always had. Even more of it now is available. So I would definitely say look into Trader Pro for the same reasons, Diana, that you looked into the Top Gun a while back. Now, I want to ask you this. I love this, by the way. We need to do more than this show, so I hope you'll agree to come back sometime, but because I got lots of other questions I want to ask you. But this one I'd like to try to get in today on this episode. Tell me a little bit about how you began to create an actual track record of trading, because, you know, it didn't take you long. And one of the reasons that you ended up being on the staff at Tradeway is because you created a trading record. So what was that like? Because you're kind of like me. If you think about it, I run 3 companies, so I'll always be a part-time trader. I'm not a full-time trader like so many of our students are, but I'm a part-time trader because it's so flexible. You don't have to stop your career if you love your career. You can do your career and trade on the side like I do. You were in a place where you didn't so much love your career, at least not the one out there in the corporate world, but all of a sudden you found a love for working with Tradeway, so you still have a career, but you still trade. So you're like me, you're a part-time trader. How did you get to the place of that class that day that you just described so in such a cool way, to a place where you actually tried some small money trades like we advocate, and then you started trading, and then later you became part of the, not just the staff of Tradeway, but you are the compliance officer for a federally registered investment advisory firm. So tell me about that little voyage you took from really knowing nothing about short-term trading to the place where you are now.
Well, again, to me, it goes back to the sovereignty of God, because when I look back and I see how everything came together, never in my wildest dreams would anyone have been able to tell me at the point that we came through Tradeway that I would end up where I am. I would have said, yeah, when pigs fly or when the cow jumps over the moon, probably. But it was interesting because when I started talking to a friend of mine at the same company that I worked for, he's actually the CFO. I actually brought them to Tradeway, and they actually bought Top Gun as well. And so he and I would talk about trading. Well, one day, the owner of the company overheard us talking, and he's a very successful Jewish businessman. And I'm only interjecting the Jewish portion of it because you always talk about how, we're not taught this. The Jewish people understand business and entrepreneurship better than anybody else because it's so historical, it's biblical, it goes all the way back. And so he heard us talking one day, and then he started talking stock with me. Of course, this was before I started working with Tradeway, and I'd say, well, I wouldn't do this, I would do that. Well, at the time, I wasn't the compliance officer, so I could say this or that or the other. And he was trying out certain things that I was saying to him, and he'd come back and he'd ask me another question. I said, I think you just need to go to a meeting with me, become a Top Gun yourself, and quit relying on your financial advisor. So it was very fun because I had other people to talk to about it as well. And we would be in a meeting because I was the vice president of finance, so I was on the executive team. So we'd be in a meeting, and I used to not bring my phone into the meeting, but I had alerts set up on my phone. And so, because you have to do that when you're a part-time trader. If you're away, you got to have something to track your trades.
All right. So you say you had an alert on your phone. What that means is your brokerage company had an app or something that you had on your phone where when your stock was to the sell point, you'd gotten in at a lower price. When it went to your predetermined sell point, that you had decided that before you bought the stock, according to our rules, that phone chirped and said, you need to sell. So you go out and you hit the button and sell that stock. And that's money in the account when that happens, right? So that's, in case our friends out there don't know what you're talking about, that's what you meant by an alert. And let me say one other thing, since I already interrupted you. You keep mentioning the sovereignty of God. Could I give a scripture that I know is a scripture that you know, and you and I are in agreement on this at this point? And some of you guys maybe might be in a church where these kind of verses don't come up. But listen to this, Proverbs 16:9. A man's heart devises his way. Now that's clear that the Lord knows us. He knows we're going to make plans. You had already made plans, and you were in a particular position in your life before you ever met Tradeway because of the steps you took, the plans you made. And so that's great. We're supposed to make plans. But look what it says. A man's heart devises his way, but the Lord directs his steps. So you found yourself in a Tradeway class you had not planned, and God put you there. And that's really part of his plan. Is it includes your plans, but his plan's always better. So, I mean, when you talk about sovereignty of God, you're talking about the fact that God is in control of the details of our lives. Proverbs 19:21, there are many devices in a man's heart. Nevertheless, the counsel of the Lord, that is what will stand. So that's stuff you're talking about. And so God led you into the place where you gained these pretty cool skill sets that even your Jewish financial genius owner of the company you worked for, he had not seen these things.
He had not. And actually, I'd worked for him for 35 years. And it's interesting because I went to work for him when I was 23 years old. I went to work for him. And I think that even as I matured and all of those things and grew within the company, there's two types of employees. You either grow with the company or the company outgrows you. And I always stayed on top of my skill set. Number one, because I was passionate about what I did. I am just fascinated by finance as a whole. I actually created a secondary business within his business that even when he sold his main business, he retained and still has today. So it was fun because it brought me to a level even with him that I'd never reached before with him, because he started looking at me in a different light, because he would ask me questions regarding his financial situation and different stocks and things that he was doing. And just based on what I had learned and, showed him the potential. And I never, ever would tell him, he'd say, well, you did this too. Well, how much did you make? And I would say, well, we all have a certain potential, and you just have to understand and decide what your potential is. And the Lord determines what our potential is, because he's going to give us the skill set at the point that we're supposed to have it. Well, I'm not so sure that he particularly cared for that answer, but it certainly created a certain amount of respect and really put me on almost an even playing field with him in some regards.
Diana, that's interesting that you mentioned that, because I have friends who are students in Tradeway, because we get to know each other and are like family, a lot of us. And I've got any number I can think of right now who, because they learned these skill sets and got good at trading, all of a sudden they were able to get twice the salary, because now they saw their worth more clearly, their own worth more clearly, because their boss had seen their worth at the level of salary they were making. They were worth more than that. And when they saw that, the boss saw it and afraid they were going to lose them because they could go and just trade and didn't have to work there anymore. And I've had cases where they'd say, well, I'm probably am going to leave and just trade. And they said, well, if I pay you twice as much, will you stay? So then they stay, get twice the salary, and trade on the side until eventually sometimes they do trade for a living. So this was happening to you. All of a sudden your boss was seeing that your value was much higher than what he was paying you.
It was, and it was really kind of funny because it also got to the point where if he saw me kind of glance down and to my left, because I'd have my phone on my lap and kind of turn it over, if an alert went off, he'd say, "You just got an alert on that stock that you're in, didn't you?" And I said, "Well, yeah." And he goes, "Do we need to take a break?" He would take a break so that I could do whatever I needed to do. So it was really kind of, when you work for somebody for 35 years and, they get to know your kids and you see their kids, when they're growing up and things, it creates a certain relationship. And so it was kind of fun, at some point. I tried to keep that obviously to a limitation. But he almost turned it into kind of a game because he'd say, "Oh, you just got an alert. Do we need to take a break?"
That's funny. Well, now, Diana, you find yourself working full-time with Tradeway. But I just think it's so cool how, as a student, early on, you were influencing your boss and the people that worked with you, and some of them even came and became top guns as well because of your influence, because you had seen the value in it and they could just see that from you. That is really cool. But what I get from this that is so remarkable is that the Lord led you to this event, and He is the one who showed you that your value is infinitely higher than what your boss thought, and even what you thought probably. And you got a lot of things from this. You got the ability to have potential for extra cash flow that could help with the bills and to get out of debt and so forth. But also you could see even a bigger picture of what that could mean out there in the future with the potential to create wealth through the generations as you teach this to your children and grandchildren someday. And all these really cool things. And I have to believe all of that is the main reason you had a desire to come and be our compliance officer, because you wanted to help us out. You have a ministering spirit. I mean, one of the questions I wanted to ask you, and I know we don't have time at this point, I was going to ask you, can you remember the first time that, I know we first met at a break at these meetings and got to know each other a little bit, but the first time that we actually sat down and talked for about an hour and saw that we had so many mutual interests that we both independently kind of thought we're probably going to work together someday. And so long story short, the Lord brought that to pass, but He already had it planned, didn't He? And He just had to reveal it to me and you. But I'm so glad, because you're not just the best compliance officer in the world, in my opinion, but you're a great friend and a great stock trader and a great spiritual sister. And we can talk about the Bible. We can talk about the Lord. We have so much more yet to do together. And I'm so glad you decided to come on this show with me. And we want to have you back. And will you come back sometime and be with us again?
I'd be honored to. It's been a lot of fun.
All right. That is so cool. And guys, I want to remind you about Trader Pro. Go out there to Tradeway.com. The main thing is get to the place where you have that potential to change the life of your family financially. And that's what Trader Pro is all about. So check it out. And also, if you enjoyed this episode, please go out there and rate and review the podcast. We would sure appreciate that. And you know what we'll do as a special thanks? We're going to give you free access to our incredible Word on Investing virtual summit coming up April 22nd through 24th, 2021. And man, you're going to hear some of our incredible Season 2 guests, Dr. Myron Golden. You're going to hear Tom Sosnoff. You're going to hear all kinds of amazing people. Sharon Lecter. I mean, I can't name them all. It's just going to be amazing. And it's going to be 3 value-packed days. I don't want you to miss it. So just rate and review the podcast and then register for the summit by going out to Tradeway.com. That's Tradeway.com. We'll see you next time.